The podcast you're about to listen to may contain random lines from musical theater, terrible attempts at regional accents, and a sincere discussion about mental health. You have been warned. Are you ready to start singing with your feet? Formidable! Allez, c'est parti! Non, nous ne sommes pas fous, nous ne sommes pas ivres, nous sommes juste dans la joie. Une joie profonde, nos cœurs elle inonde. Cette joie, elle vient du ciel. Non, nous ne sommes pas fous.
Welcome to Sing With Your Feet, the podcast in which we figure out that the question, why, doesn't actually mean why. The podcast in which we learn to enjoy our own presence as much as we would someone fascinating that we've just met. The podcast in which we dig around looking for something that seems to be working, whether it's big or small, and we find a way to celebrate it. My name is Lily Fields, and I am going to be your fairy godmother for the next half hour or so. Let's start with a little housekeeping. Cinderella, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Today, we are starting a 4-episode series to examine the 4 questions we ask ourselves each day about just one of our ideal life themes. Pop quiz. Can you name 5 of the ideal life themes? These are those 19 circles on that big, beautiful Venn diagram of your life, and we have spent about half the year looking at each one of those themes under a microscope. So this little series about curiosity will take us up to Thanksgiving. When we arrive at the holidays, I am going to unleash some serious fairy dust to help you live your holidays according to who you are in your ideal life, according to your love languages and the love languages of those with whom you will be celebrating. We will talk about how to give awesome gifts and to feel really, really good about it. And hint, it's about the love languages too. And we're going to return to the evergreen and problematic holiday topic of commitments. Speaking of commitments, a few weeks ago, I promised that I was going to give some helpful hints and handy tips about withdrawing from commitments that we dread. Things that we simply do out of guilt or that have reached a logical conclusion but we can't figure out how to end. Well, I promise you, Cinderella, that's still coming. And we are going to be looking at it through the lens of the holidays. But the lessons that we learn then will be applicable across our lives. It will just give us an opportunity to practice them. All right. Now, with a little bit of perspective about where we're going with the rest of this year, let's talk about curiosity. Curiosity is a perfectly natural part of the human experience. It also happens to be a virtue, which means that if we aren't careful with what we say right now, we might just wake up that strange woman, the philosopher princess, who literally only exists to pontificate about how the pursuit of virtue is the path to happiness. If both these ideas are true, that curiosity is an innate part of being human, and that the pursuit of this curiosity can be one lane on the path to happiness, then I have just one question. Why in the world are we not asking more questions? Curiosity is what takes a helpless infant from lying on his back to lying on his belly. And curiosity is what takes that same child from his tummy time to scooting. As child development goes, the first crawl and the first steps are often an effort to reach out for something of interest. It's curiosity that motivates a child to become mobile. So, first point on curiosity from our earliest moments of life is a mobilizing force. Once a kid starts talking, he will almost without fail enter a why phase. The parent, incidentally, also starts entering their own why phase, like, why did I ever think that being a parent would be a good idea? But I digress. Actually, no. No, I'm not digressing. Because when my child entered his why phase, I truly thought that there was something wrong with him. This question seemed outrageously outsized. It felt almost like it was a tic. Like maybe he couldn't say anything else. It was like he was stuck. How in the world can anyone keep their sanity intact? And I am not exaggerating here when everything that a parent says is countered with the question, why? My own Google search was proof that I was losing my mind. Dear Google, I would write, why does my child say why all the time? And is there something wrong with a child that says why all the time? And how am I supposed to not lose my mind by answering the question, why? I guess I was in a little bit of my own why phase, only Google didn't mind answering my questions all the time. I learned one very, very important thing about the why phase of a young child. Why does not mean why. Give that a little thought, would you? The question why, when it comes from a child, did not mean that I, as a parent, needed to become a walking encyclopedia of how magnetic forces work or how a seed sprouts in the ground. The question why, when asked at the height of the why phase, means, I want to talk about this. The child isn't looking for a technical answer about electromagnetics or about biology. He just wants to talk about how cool it is that magnets stick to the refrigerator, and he wants something to think that it is as fun as he does. He wants someone to marvel at how cool it is that a seed can go into the ground and transform into something else with a little bit of sunlight and a little bit of water. He's not asking for a technical answer laden with principles of physics to explain why birds fly and he can't. But he might just want to talk about birds or flying. And instead of answering the why with a sigh and a hey Google, if I could shift the conversation to something I did know something about, or was at least a little curious about myself, like a movie I once saw that was called The Boy Who Could Fly, or about Icarus and his wax wings, or about how funny flamingos look when they fly, or about ostriches who can't fly, or maybe about a flying squirrel, or a jetpack. Well, his curiosity wasn't going to make me crazy anymore. It became a wide-ranging conversation. The question why doesn't mean why. It means let's talk some more. I don't know how it happens, but at some point, this curiosity, this incessant why starts to phase. It happens, I guess, because we actually start learning how things work. We develop a sufficient body of knowledge of the natural world to not be surprised by everything we see. There are fewer mysteries. Another thing happens, and this goes back to something I mentioned when we were talking about creativity. I think we stop asking why because our curiosity gets suffocated by certainty. Remember how we talked about how the antidote to the discomfort of uncertainty was creativity? Because creativity hands us back a small amount of control and can help us build resilience when faced with circumstances beyond our control. Certainty, comfort, as pleasant and as desirable as those things can be, they are not guaranteed. And when we start to have too much of either of these, we get lulled into a false sense of security. Our curiosity gets blotted out. When something comes in and shakes us out of our comfort or certainty, we lose a loved one, or a job, or a child moves out of the home, or anything really, anything that upends the way we are used to living, what is often our first question? Why is this happening to me? And then we're back to square one. Why? A child is curious and creative. Adults are set in their way and rigid. I'm stereotyping, and I apologize if you were offended. But if you were offended, then maybe you need to ask yourself, why? I want to help you re-engage with your curiosity. I want you to learn how to be inquisitive about your own rich inner life and about who you are and who you want to be. There is so much to gain by learning how to examine your own heart, your own behavior, your own wants, and yes, your own disappointments. I want to help you cultivate curiosity about yourself. When we meet someone for the first time, we can tell pretty quickly whether or not that person is someone we want to get to know better. If you've ever been stuck next to someone who likes only to talk about themselves and never asks you a single question, if you're like me, you will escape from that conversation as quickly as possible. You see, getting to know someone is about asking questions. When we find someone, though, who is openly intrigued about us and who we are interested in knowing more about too, well, curiosity comes naturally. It makes time fly. Conversations are easy when we are curious. I suspect you know where I'm going with this subject, don't you? Yep, I want you to love yourself. I want you to be your own best friend. I want you to start being curious about yourself the way you would with someone fascinating who you just met. The finality of this curiosity is, as with just about everything I like to talk about, is the golden rule. Love others as you love yourself. But if you don't love yourself, then how in the world are you going to love others? If you want healthy relationships and you want to meet interesting people who are interested in you, well, darling, you need to start by being interested in you too. You need to start being curious about you, and that's what we're doing here today. Let's pretend that you and I are at a dinner party. There are maybe 15 other boring, snooty people, and you and I end up alone drinking our Manhattans in the corner by the fireplace. I'm telling you right now, I find you fascinating. I will never get tired of asking you questions. Hopefully, not questions so prying that you will want to run out the door as fast as you can, but I sure won't get tired of it. Here are the questions that I would ask you as we're sitting there watching the fire while those other boring people drone on. There's 3 questions, so get ready. Number 1, who are you living for? Number 2, do you love yourself? And number 3, can you celebrate who you are? If you can't answer those huge, important questions, then you and I will be talking all night long after those drones have had their nightcaps and gone home to bed. Your ability to answer those 3 questions is going to be influenced by 2 paradoxes that our friend, the philosopher princess, has elaborated for us. The first is the mama paradox. The second is the good girl paradox. The mama paradox isn't just for moms, but it's one that I've come to define since becoming a mom. And by me, I mean the philosopher princess. It's for anyone who lives with existential guilt. The mama paradox says, I must live for others because that's what the golden rule tells me to do, even if I never actually end up living. Somewhere along the line, we learn to prioritize the needs and desires of others above our own, and we end up either living vicariously through or by proxy for other people. Neither of these is an actual life. When we pin our hopes and our sense of self on the successes of another person, which is also known as living vicariously through someone else, we are not using our own time, talent, and treasure. We are imputing on ourselves the rewards of someone else's time, talent, and treasure. Each one of us has been given our own time, our own talent, and our own treasure. We were assigned it, and we are to use it throughout our lives. Hiding from our responsibility to that assignment by living through someone else is one way we actually start to attenuate our own curiosity. We are delegating responsibility for living to someone else. This happens when we become a parent. The other side of this is when we are living as a proxy for someone else. We carry the weight of the hopes that someone else has for an ideal life. We're no longer carrying our own. That is an ideal life for which we were not equipped. We were specially equipped for our ideal life. We will never succeed at living out someone else's ideal life. We can only live our own. Anyone who puts on us the expectation of their dreams is blocking their own joy and your joy. Looking at that first paradox helps us determine our answer to the first question. Who am I living for? So that second paradox is called the good girl paradox. Being a girl is mind-bendingly complex. I mean, there's a cultural expectation for little girls to be cute, gentle, well-behaved. Even while nowadays there are efforts to increase girls' representation in things like STEM subjects, there are actual biological differences between boys and girls which make it so that certain concepts come to boys without even trying. And listen, I'm a feminist, and I'm still saying this. And here's how I know. I have 2 little boys. External genitalia is a boon to learning about physics, and I say this as a mom to 2 boys who I have watched in wretched awe as they learn about physics through pissing contests. Enough said. As we grow up, we learn that a good girl doesn't call attention to herself. We learn simultaneously that our bodies are wonderful and can do all kinds of amazing things, but that we need to keep them under wraps because they make boys crazy. Sorry, I just loudly rolled my eyes. So we live in this inconsistent space. We are worthy, we are awesome, but we can't say it out loud or make too big of a deal out about it because, boys. Humility and modesty are 2 virtues that get easily confused one for the other. Modesty is about not calling attention to ourselves, much like discretion. Humility is about not having too high an opinion of ourselves. And then there's the virtue of lucidity. It's one I think can come in and help us get out of the miry muck of the paradox of the good girl. Lucidity means that we know what we're good at, we know what we aren't good at, and not in a prideful or self-destructive way, but in a, I know my worth and I don't get down on myself for the things I don't do well kind of way. This helps us answer the second question. Do I love me? If you don't have an answer to that question, then we need to keep digging. And that last question, can I celebrate who I am? Well, that is the one that we will develop as we get into the meat of our first daily ideal life exercise question. Let's take a second and remember real quickly the context in which we do our ideal life exercise. I've been arguing since day one that this needs to be something you do early in the morning, before anyone in your home wakes up. It only takes a few minutes, but being able to do it without the distraction of having to be anyone for anyone is going to help you get to the heart of the questions more quickly and more efficiently. I do mine every morning on the couch. I set up my little spot in the evening before, setting up the pillows just right with the hot plate that I will eventually set my coffee pot on the next morning when my coffee percolates. I also have the blanket at the ready. I don't do anything until I have coffee. Our first question of the 4 is, what is working? One reason that doing this exercise early in the morning is beneficial is that it sets you up to start your day by being mindful of at least one little success. It also sets you up to have the entire day in front of you to answer the 4th question, which, spoiler alert, is what one small thing can I do today to get me closer to my ideal life? Once you have developed a habit of doing the ideal life exercise, you will quickly have data points to refer back to. My themes repeat every 3 weeks, so already after 3 weeks, I'm able to start checking back on progress, seeing what was working, what wasn't working, and checking in on what I did to get me closer to my ideal life. All right, so let's get into that first question. What is working?
Elle me fait bondir et vibrer, crier. Elle me donne envie de chanter, danser. Elle pousse à agir, donner, partager. Et tout simplement de sourire, aimer.
Remember, each day we are only looking at one theme in our big, beautiful Venn diagram of our ideal life. This is already a slightly targeted question. What is working in this area of my ideal life? Whether parenting, body positivity, or gravitas, or work. What is one thing that has been going well? Now, I hear what you're already thinking, Cinderella, and you're saying, but Lily, what if nothing is working? We'll get to that. And I do have an answer and a list of questions to get you curious about this too. But for now, let's look at when something actually is working. These can be big things or little things. Big things are obviously easier to pinpoint. And usually, if something big is working, we don't have to think very hard about it for it to pop into our minds. This is often getting something off of our plate or meeting some kind of success for ourselves. Very often, when we answer the question, what is working, and we have a big thing that is working, it's the result of having steadily made progress towards that goal. Taking a moment to recognize that work is the fun part of this step. We aren't being prideful or showy. The good girl paradox gets thrown out the window. When something works, it is in our best interest to ask that evergreen question, why? Why did it work? Was it something I did? How can I get more of that into my life? It's when something is working that we can understand more about our own motivations. How did we stay motivated to get through to this result? What were the overlapping influences that brought us to this successful outcome? Be curious and celebrate yourself. Write these things down because they will become a precious part of your own autobiography from which you will be able to become your own inspiration as you seek motivation at times when things are going less well or when you're struggling to see any progress at all. When nothing big is working, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't still rack our brain looking for something to celebrate. Something that is working doesn't have to be a major goal that was accomplished. Most of my answers to the question, what is working, are little things. Working hard to remember them and writing them down is a daily effort at mindfulness, gratitude, and contentment. Asking myself what is working puts me into the state of mind of I am living for myself and I love me. Therefore, I am confident that if I look hard, there is something good to be found in this area of my life. And I'm not asking you to be toxically positive. I don't want you to be Pollyanna. I am asking you to dig deep and look for one tiny little silver lining. And if a silver lining is too much to ask for, then look for one random silvery hanging thread. Searching for that one tiny thing that is working is an exercise in lucidity and mindfulness. Again, I hear you. Sometimes nothing is working. Not everything is sunshine and roses and mindfulness and gratitude. But not everything sucks all the time either. Really seeking out, with curiosity, asking myself to find just one little thing that worked over the last 3 weeks in this area, it means that I am not simply being reactionary to a recent situation. It also means that I'm learning how to relativize. So, last night, I set up my couch cushions. I got my blanket folded just right so that when I sat down, I would have to pull it over me and not have to mess with it. My theme for this morning was wise decisions. We've all agreed in the past that this is not a terribly exciting theme, and it is one that does not exist by itself either. It comes from statements about how I want to make decisions that get me closer to my ideal life in all the different areas, and decisions that hopefully don't get me further away from my ideal life. For example, in my ideal life, I am someone who consents fully to my commitments and doesn't commit rashly. It's also about moment-by-moment decisions like how I react when my children misbehave and choosing to do the right thing even when I'm tired or bored. Obviously, I don't always succeed at any of these all the time. But this morning, I needed to give some thought to what worked over the last 3 weeks since the last time I covered this topic. I'll be honest, there was nothing big that worked. I haven't made any big, important decisions lately. If I weren't dedicated to digging deep on this topic, I might have been tempted to say, nothing's really working. But instead of skipping this question, I went back and I looked at where I was 3 weeks ago and the 3 weeks before that. I was struck by just how much had happened since then. 6 weeks ago, it was still the summer vacation. 3 weeks ago, we were in the throes of back to school, and back then, absolutely nothing was working. It was chaos. 3 weeks ago, I was in decision-making paralysis. I was getting invited to do things, and I was getting asked to head up little projects, but I was overwhelmed and unable to think straight. So I decided then, 3 weeks ago, to not decide on purpose. In mid to late September, I decided that I was going to put off making any decisions or any commitments that weren't already in the works until October. My indulgent husband, who is a teacher, and he and I have always said, even before we had children, that we can't freak out about back to school until October 1st, because we need 1 full month of data before we're allowed to freak out about how busy or crazy things are. So, do you know what I was able to list as having worked for me today? Deciding not to decide. Something almost magical happened once the calendar switched to October and the overwhelm lessened all by itself. I was able to think straight again. It's not a big thing by any stretch of the imagination. It is, by definition, inaction. But that inaction served me well and gave me time to come back in off the ledge of back to school. So you see, while I couldn't, off the top of my head, find anything that was working particularly well, it took comparing to what had been going on a few weeks ago and a few weeks before that to see that I was moving in the right direction. And you know how I'm going to celebrate that? I am going to take a walk on this gorgeous October afternoon while my 2 scalawags are at their music lessons. I might even take with me a mug of tea to carry in my hand and find the sidewalks that are the thickest with those crunchy fallen leaves so that I can crunch them underfoot. And I might even listen to Vivaldi while I'm doing it. Oh, that sounds amazing. Now listen to me, Cinderella. You are fascinating. You have so much life behind you that made you who you are today, and you can be proud of how you got where you are. I really want you to think about those 3 questions I asked earlier. Number 1, who are you living for? I do not want to hear that you are living vicariously through or living by proxy for anyone else. I want you to pursue your ideal life. Not your mother's ideal life, not your neighbor's ideal life, not your spouse's ideal life, not your kid's ideal life. I want you to live your ideal life. Number 2, do you love yourself? Are you willing to look for the good in yourself and be lucid about what you're good at? Admitting that there is good in you is not pride. If loving yourself feels like an interrogation or like an inquisition today, then it just means that you have more work to do. But there is so much about you to love that I believe that if you just spent a few minutes each day thinking about what's working and the progress that you've made, you will start to see it too. Number 3. How can you celebrate who you are? Can you celebrate who you are? Can you set aside some time to celebrate in ways that feel authentic to you or in ways that demonstrate your affection for yourself in ways that are meaningful to you? You can do this, Cinderella. Be curious about yourself, and you will never be bored. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on your podcatcher, and please, if you enjoy something you've heard here, share it with someone you think could use a fairy godmother too. I am on Instagram at Lilyfields Challenge, and the podcast you can find at Sing With Your Feet, also on Facebook. I want to give a great big thank you to 7 Productions here in Mulhouse, France for the use of the song La Joie as the intro and outro to the show. Also, a great big thank you to Matt Kugler who sang it and to Claude Ekwe who wrote it. This is your fairy godmother signing off. Just remember, it is never too late to start singing with your feet.